If you are part of an executive team or working with an executive team as part of a digital transformation, there are a number of core fundamental concepts that are critical to understand before you start your digital transformation. That's what I want to talk about here today. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation. And every day we're working with clients, we're typically working with executive teams. And oftentimes when working with those executive teams, there's a misalignment between perception and reality. In other words, executives don't fully understand oftentimes what it takes to be successful or what it's going to take to be successful in a digital transformation. So what I wanted to do today is speak directly to those executive teams, but even if you're not part of one of those executive teams, I encourage you to listen to this video and also share this video with your executive steering committees, especially if you're about to start a digital transformation or perhaps if you're struggling with a digital transformation as well. And these are the core fundamental concepts that I always try to convey to any executive team that we work with. So the first thing to understand as an executive is that this is not a technology upgrade. Technology might be a part of the transformation and it might be called a digital transformation, but the reality is technology has the least amount of material significance to whether or not the project succeeds or fails. For example, you look at things like business processes and how well defined your business processes and requirements are, your organizational design, your future state target operating model, the overall digital strategy, the resources that you deploy on the project. Those are just some of the things that are more important than the types of technology you deploy or how effectively you implement new technologies. In fact, I'm going to get to many of those points later in this video, but in general, first and foremost, it's important to understand that this is not a technology upgrade. This should be viewed as a business transformation. One of the biggest faux pas I see with executive teams is that they think the change is going to be a lot easier than it really is. In fact, I've yet to meet an executive team or any sort of team member from any organization for that matter that has told me that the change was about as they expected or the difficulty of change was as they expected. And I certainly have yet to meet the client or the team that tells me that they thought the change was easier than they thought it was going to be. That just simply doesn't happen. In fact, it's usually the opposite. Usually executives think that the change is going to be easy because it's so clear that we have an old outdated system or that our processes are broken or that we're spending too much time and money on inefficient processes. And our team seems to recognize that, therefore the change is going to be easy because the team is behind us. And that might be true on the surface and that might be true early in the project, but I'm here to warn you early on that at some point in the near future, if it hasn't already started, you're going to see a resistance to change, and that resistance to change is going to be more severe than you expected. So for that reason, it's important to understand that change is going to be harder than you think and that change management is going to be a critical aspect of any sort of successful transformation. Many executive teams we work with tend to manage their digital transformations through abdication or delegation. They assume that they're going to delegate to a project team or to a system integrator or software vendor, implementation partner, outside consultant, or whoever it might be. They assume that they can delegate responsibility and the overall accountability for success to someone else. But the reality is, it's the executive team that defines whether or not the project is successful. And I know that might be bad news for a lot of you that are thinking that you want to hire an expert to just take this over for you or to handle this project for you. But the reality is only you as executives are going to be able to make this project successful. And that comes in the form of setting a clear vision for the project, setting expectations, defining the metrics and the value you expect to get out of the transformation, making sure that you have appropriate internal resources supporting the project, making sure that you take ownership and accountability for the project rather than your system integrator or your software vendor. Ultimately, it has to be you, the organization, that's responsible and accountable for making the project successful. And if your outside third parties aren't enabling that or aren't helping you effectively do that, then it's up to you to make that change. You can either sit back and blame them and assume that they're somehow going to fix it, or you can take whatever action you need to ensure that the project is successful. And this is also important from the perspective of buy-in and involvement. So the executive team really needs to be bought into the change, and they also need to be more involved than they probably think they need to be. And this is uncomfortable for a lot of executives. And so what I mean by that is that you need to roll up your sleeves and make some difficult decisions throughout the transformation. For example, when you look at your future state target operating model, That is generally going to entail some sorts of business process changes or transformation to the operations. And ultimately, it's up to you to bless those or to define what those transformation processes should be. And at the very least, it's up to you to challenge the status quo and ensure that you're actually getting the value out of this transformation that you expect. It's important to remember that the status quo is like gravity. You're going to constantly get pulled back to the status quo throughout the transformation, and it's up to you as leaders within the organization to really pull away from that status quo and really help set the future and the tone for what this transformation means to your organization. Given the dismal success rate, or failure rate I should say, for digital transformations over the last several decades, it's easy for project teams and the executive teams that lead them to set the bar too low. In other words, they think to themselves, I just want to make sure I don't screw this up, rather than thinking about how can I really use this as an opportunity to improve my business, to change the business model, to improve our business processes, to restructure the way we're organized, to enable a better strategy going forward, whatever the case may be. You really want to move beyond the just don't screw it up mentality and more to how can we really enable and further business value as part of this transformation. Now, you certainly don't want to screw this up. You don't want to fail, but defense is only one part of this. You also have to go on offense and define what that future state is going to be and really lead the charge, which can be uncomfortable for a lot of organizations, and it creates pain for a lot of organizations. So again, the path of least resistance would be don't do it, just go back to the status quo, or just don't screw it up and be happy with that. But you have to remember that you're probably going to fall short of whatever goal you set. So if you set the bar too low, you're going to probably fall even shorter than that. So you don't want to be overly aggressive in your goal setting, but you do want to push the organization and make sure that you're challenging the status quo. One thing that drives me crazy about the digital transformation space is this perception that there's a best practice or a cookie cutter approach to making a transformation successful. It simply isn't true. Every transformation, every digital strategy, every project plan, every overall approach needs to look different. It needs to fit your organization. So it's really important that you take the time to set the tempo for your project to get it right. Make sure you have the time and the resources and the focus to get it right. It may be that your software vendor is telling you that they can implement new technologies at one of your locations in 6 months, let's just say. But the reality is maybe 12 months is more appropriate. Maybe a slower burn and the time to really get it right and to let the changes percolate throughout the organization, maybe that makes more sense to your organization. Or maybe you're risk adverse and you just don't move as fast as an outside software vendor might be able to. Rather than trying to change overnight and just trying to move as fast as a software vendor, which isn't realistic, why not just focus on your culture and who you are and how risk adverse you are or aren't and set the tempo based on that. So it's really important that no matter what speed you go at or how much you invest in this or how many resources you put on the project, you just want to make sure it matches who you are as an organization and that you take the time to do the most important aspects of the project. And a spoiler alert here is that most of the most important aspects of a transformation have more to do with things that you should be doing or that things that your software vendor or system integrators should not be doing more specifically. So things like data migration, change management, process improvements, overall program management and governance. So those are all things that should be owned by you internally, and you don't want to be too dependent on your outside consultants to do that for you because, again, you want to make sure you take the time to get it right and act in your best interest. So for those reasons, you want to make sure you do set the tempo and take the time to get your project right. If there's one thing I can leave you with that's arguably the most important part of this whole discussion, it's that the more you invest in your people and the more that you invest in the organizational change components of your transformation, the more successful your project's going to be. So in other words, if you had to choose between over-investing or investing more in technology or the technology implementation, I would say don't do that. Redirect more of that money to invest in your people, invest in change management, make sure you get it right from a people perspective. The most successful organizations are the ones that were most successful in their change management initiatives. And the ones that are most likely to fail or do fail are the ones that least invest in change management. So this kind of brings this whole conversation full circle back to the first point I made, which is this change is going to be harder than you think, and therefore investing in people, investing in change management is the way to mitigate that and some of the other risks that I've talked about throughout this video. So I hope this has given you some things to think about for you yourselves if you're part of an executive team or a leadership team, or if you're part of a project team. I hope I've given you some good guidance and some good thoughts to think about, but more importantly, I hope you share these ideas with your executive team if they're not already listening or watching this. And for more information on best practices and things that your executive team should know, I encourage you to download our annual digital transformation report. It's an annual report we put out each year that goes through the best practices for digital transformation success. It provides independent reviews and rankings of different types of technologies that might help enable a digital transformation. And it also covers some of the change management aspects of transformation as well. So I encourage you to download that. I've included a link in the description field below. So I hope you found this information useful and hope you have a great day.